Okay, we're live. Hi, everybody. I'm Megan Thompson, and I have Best Child here. And I wanted to spend some time talking about what to do when your highly sensitive child has an ODD diagnosis. But first, I wanted to introduce our guest here. So,
Hi.
everybody
hmm
say hi to Bess. Bess is a therapist and group practice owner in Massachusetts, and we actually met through a mutual colleague and good friend of mine, ours, and found out that she lives in Massachusetts, and serves the high school that I went to school with, which is kind of
Yeah,
crazy.
I know. I have kids from that area. It's funny.
I actually sent you this weird message via email or something, and that's how we got to talking. And I don't know if it was like a butt dial or something, and um,
It was
like
fate, whatever it was.
yeah, whatever it was. I sent you like a funny email and you responded with a non-snarky remark, but I totally would have been snarky if I'd gotten the email that I sent to you by accident. I can't even remember what it was. But anyways, that got us to talking. We found out that we live near, she lives near where I grew up. And we jive really well in terms of our style of therapy and personality and what have you. And Bess actually runs two Facebook groups on the therapy side, consulting and consults with therapists who work with teens who are self-harming and suicidal, and I should say engage in self-harm, so hurt themselves or worry or threaten to kill themselves or have attempted to kill themselves. And so because I do a similar thing in my practice with highly sensitive teens, Bess and I really jived really well on that respect as well. And, you know, we, we feel the same way about this diagnosis, oppositional defiant disorder. And I wanted to talk about that today because a therapist was actually talking about it in one of your groups, Bess, and then you went live about it. And I was like, you know what, the parents I work with need to hear about that too. But for those of you who are watching who are not familiar with oppositional defiant disorder, I wanted to just spend some time really getting clear on what we're actually talking about first, so that you can get a picture of why this gets us fired up and why it gets some therapists fired up, and why it can be really harmful for your kiddo. So first I wanted to talk about, what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing is parents of highly sensitive kids. You're dealing with daily meltdowns. You're dealing with kids who are telling you no because they're struggling to manage themselves at home, or frustrated at school and not able to manage their own emotions well. They feel big feelings. We go over that a lot. And so a problem that I see a lot of parents, or that I hear a lot of parents face, is that they try and get support locally, and that, they're just looking for, you're just looking for somebody who can hear them, who can understand where they're coming from, who can finally give them an idea of what to do about it. And the challenge with that is that some therapists are not equipped to understand highly sensitive kids, and not really trained in understanding child development and the expression of emotions for children compared to teens or adults. And so what happens is that some parents of highly sensitive kids end up with a label. They end up with a diagnosis that, and parents feel like, oh, finally somebody gets it. There's a name for this. That they're going to help me. And that label or diagnosis is oppositional defiant disorder. This is really, in my opinion, professional opinion, scary for your highly sensitive child. And not just gets me fired up and frustrates me, but I think that it can do a world of damage for your child to have an oppositional defiant disorder diagnosis. And I wanted to talk about that, but before we do that, I wanted to just read the from the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, which is the manual that we as therapists use to diagnose children and adolescents and adults. It's what mental health professionals use. And I'm not going to go on my ranty diatribe about what diagnoses are appropriate for kids versus what diagnoses are appropriate for adolescents and adults. We're just talking about this one in particular. But I wanted to give you some clarity around this particular diagnosis so that you're fully informed on what the implications are for your child. And so the first thing to notice is that the section that this diagnosis lives in the book is called Disruptive Impulse Control and Conduct Disorders. So it's a disorder that is categorized by the medical model of the way that we work with children and help children feel better, as a problem. I don't know how else to say it. Like, it's the problem child section, or the problem child diagnosis section. And so that first, like, gets me really fired up, because I say all the time, your kid is not broken. And the second thing is that oppositional defiant disorder is characterized. I'm just going to read a summary of this straight from the book. I'm not making this up. Of a pattern of angry, irritable mood, argumentative or defiant behavior, or vindictiveness lasting at least 6 months. And so the angry or irritable mood might be that often loses temper, which we know highly sensitive kids have big feelings, is often touchy or easily annoyed, which we know highly sensitive kids can be easily overstimulated and therefore touchy, is often angry or resentful, and we know that highly sensitive kids can struggle with their emotions and can react and be impulsive. Often argues with authority figures. I mean, and, you know, Bess, you were talking about it today, and we can kind of chat a little bit about that. Like, we're oppositional right now, speaking against our professional, you know, our colleagues. So
yeah, I feel like that's kind of like one of my traits, is that I am defiant and oppositional. And I also think that sometimes we want our kids to be like obedient and follow the rules, but like really successful people don't do that. So it's kind of opposite of what we really want our children to do when they're older and adults in the world.
Absolutely. And it's what I speak about a lot for parents of highly sensitive kids. You want to find those passions for your child and recognize that highly sensitive children, 20% of the population, they're the game changers for the world. They are the, you know, the big thinkers, and the philosophizers, and the people who see the big picture. And when you're capable of seeing the big picture, you're capable of doing a million things, and some things very, very well. And that is the quality of an entrepreneur. And while I'm not highly sensitive, I can absolutely relate to that. You know, I definitely fit the bill, got my name written on the board in first grade every other day for talking, or just, you know, perceiving my needs to be relevant over the teachers. And if we think about that and categorize that as oppositional, I mean, where would I be today if that was the case? So I really want you to think about that for your highly sensitive kid. Where is your child going to be if you let the professional who's working with your child categorize them as oppositional and defiant? And that is really, really significant in terms of a challenge for the way that your child's therapist sees your kid and their capabilities. And so, Bess, I wanted to hear from you and talk about that and make this more of a conversation in the last couple of minutes, because I do have a 3:00 appointment. And see what, you know, your opinion is on that in terms of when you get teens into your office, because that's your specialty, and especially teens who are hurting themselves and who are threatening suicide or who have attempted suicide, because that's your specialty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that there are quite a few teens. I would say more boys get the ODD diagnosis than girls do. I find that when I get a teen who has had this history of this diagnosis, I usually ignore it, to be honest, because I'm like, I don't ever use this diagnosis because I feel like it never gets at the root of what's going on. Mm-hmm. And it also kind of creates all these assumptions for professionals, because one of the reasons we diagnose is so that when like I provide kind of a summary of what I've done and I give it to you and it has a diagnosis on it, you kind of can make some assumptions based off of that information. Mm-hmm. But the assumptions that you make based off of an ODD diagnosis are not helpful in order to create rapport and a relationship with the child. And so I think that it kind of can get in the way and be a barrier for people to look at this child as someone who can grow and change, and someone who's really like has a sweet nature. And when I think of somebody who's highly sensitive, I definitely am a highly sensitive person, and my daughter is as well. I feel like at the core there's so much good, and so if somebody has that diagnosis, it just makes it feel like there's some maliciousness, or there's something driving on purpose their behavior. Mm-hmm. And one term that's used a lot that I often will like cut parents off is that to use the term manipulative.
Absolutely.
And they've heard that from other therapists too,
Yeah.
which really upsets me because it really doesn't get at, I know we could talk about this probably for a really long time, but you do have another session right now.
Yeah, I know. 2 minutes. Yeah. And that's basically what I wanted to get on here to talk about today for parents, is that if you're working with a professional who is characterizing your child as oppositional and defiant, so much so that they are saying that your highly sensitive kid fits the bill for this diagnosis, my advice is to run. Go find somebody else. I mean, if your kid is threatening to hurt themselves or hurt other people, absolutely find another professional to work with before you leave the other practice or leave that other therapist. But it is not going to be effective working with someone who characterizes your child as oppositional and defiant.
I completely agree with that.
There is no way that professional is capable of seeing where your child can be or where your child can go. They are simply treating the problems and making those problems go away. And if that's what you want, then you need to see where your child can be. So you're actually doing your child a disservice by only focusing on the negative, and it's actually perpetuating the problem when you do that. And I've talked about that before, and so I'm not going to go into that today. But if you're having some trouble with that, finding professionals who are effective, or if this just doesn't sit with you well at all, the medical model of helping your child, then I would definitely encourage you to reach out for support. Ask questions on this video, set up a call or a consultation with me, post in this Facebook group to discuss more about it, because I'm no longer staying quiet in the use of this diagnosis in this group. I've kind of danced around the subject before, and I've been running this group since February. And that comment in your Facebook group by that therapist, I mean, it just like lit a fire under my ass. Like I can't not talk about it anymore. And so I think it's really damaging for parents of highly sensitive kids and for the children that we're talking about right now, and for them as teens as well, because if they stop therapy and then get back into therapy with another therapist as a teenager, I mean, there's a world of difference between perceiving a child as capable of making change or perceiving a child as oppositional and defiant. And
I completely
that really
agree.
just sets your kid up for not being able to make progress if you go in with that attitude.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's really important that all parents who are listening to this hear what Megan's saying and really make sure that you are asking all of the questions about their background, about the therapist that you're working with's background, and also kind of why they've come to this diagnosis. And like Megan said, I would probably run too.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, reach out for support, ask more questions, try and figure out what it is that you need to be asking. And some, especially like I said, I can't diagnose your kid over Facebook. That conversation will definitely need to be like one-on-one, whether that's through private message or really getting on a call to get a full picture. But it absolutely needs to be a game changer for you if you end up having your child wind up with this diagnosis. Sometimes it's due to lack of information, and then other times it's, like for pediatricians who give that diagnosis because they're stuck with the medical model. Doctors are stuck with the medical model if they work in a traditional practice. They have to find a diagnosis that fits your kid and then act upon it. But therapists who have the expertise, or parent coaches or consultants who have the expertise to understand child development and the damage that this can result for your kid, really, I think that there's no excuse for them to be using this diagnosis. And so, unfortunately, the way that certain agencies are run or the way that certain providers operate, they just don't have the skills to identify why this diagnosis is so harmful, and can even justify it in using it, and saying that it helps kids, which I wholeheartedly disagree and will never. I never use that diagnosis. Anytime a parent comes to me with that, either through the coaching business or through my private practice, I say absolutely not. I won't use that diagnosis, and we work to find another one if they're in my private practice, or we adjust the decision making process accordingly, depending on how I'm working with families directly. So thank you, Bess, for hopping on here. And, my 3 o'clock isn't here yet, but I'm sure they're walking in the door any minute. So I do want to
Thank
wrap
you for
up.
having me.
Ninjas, let me know if hearing from Bess would be helpful for you again. And I'm sure she'd love to get back on the line to give us more insight on what it's like to work with highly sensitive teens and the struggles you see from them, and how parents can act now to help their kids to avoid the challenges that you see in your practice.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to talk about self-harm anytime.
Perfect. Love it. Okay, awesome. Well, then we'll just set a date for after the holiday.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Megan.
Bye.